So I'd like to call this special meeting of the South Burlington School Board to order. We will start with comments, or actually we wanted to just very quickly, we just wanted to read a quick little announcement given the participation we had last time before we get started. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining the South Burlington School Board Zoom meeting. We are pleased by the level of participation for our meetings through Zoom. However, with the large number of participants, we need to set clear meeting procedures so we can conduct school board business in an orderly fashion and include the community at the same time. Thank you for your understanding and patience as we all learn these new tools and ways of life during these unprecedented times. I, Bridget Burkhart, will facilitate the meeting. Written questions can be submitted via the Q&A function in Zoom, and we will be answering those questions in the order that they are submitted. They are time-stamped. Anyone who wishes to speak will be able to do so by using the raise the hand feature in Zoom. We're going to answer written questions first. It would also really help the meeting run better if you really are adamant that you would like to speak and you raise your hand. It would be great if you saved your question for then instead of having me read it during the reading part of the questions and answers, as well as then hoping to get in at the end. So if you can choose one or the other, that would be really helpful. And then as we get to the raise the hand part, we're going to ask you to unmute yourself after Steve, or in preparation for Steve Walker, our IT person who's helping us tonight. Steve will unmute you from our end. And I will just be reading who is going to be unmuted first and then who's kind of on deck, so to speak. So you can prepare yourself to be unmuted on your end once it's your turn to speak. And if your question has already been answered during the time that we're reading questions or by the answer to someone else's question, we would just ask that if you're willing to please lower your hand. And if your question has been answered, lower your hand as well. Chat in this session is disabled entirely. So we're going to keep it to asking questions verbally or through the questions and answers. We would just ask again that we not use the question and answer section as a chat between community members. If you could really direct questions and comments to the board directly, that would be helpful. We have a capacity for up to 500 participants. Last time we had as many as 285 at one point, I think. If you're having trouble connecting, it could be that we're at our limit. If you are having problems connecting or need help using Zoom, please go to Zoom or support.zoom.us for additional help, just because we don't really have an IT person who can help you from a distance. So really Steve is here to help us facilitate the meeting. He won't be able to help individuals who are having trouble connecting. So you'll have to sort of work that out with Zoom if you can. So apologies as we're still working through the technology. Hopefully it won't be too many more weeks that we're having to operate this way. So
Bridget, this is Brian. I was wondering if it's possible for Steve to post in the Q&A section the instructions for unmuting, since participants don't see the same sort of screen that we panelists see. I remember it was a couple of keystrokes for them to unmute last time.
There's already a help function. I linked that in the chat already. Should be over there already for them.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay. All right. So with that, if we would like to start with comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda, that would be helpful. Any comments from folks about things that are not on the agenda? Just to keep it clear, tonight we are focused on the budget. It's really a special meeting just to talk about the budget. So if there are a lot of other issues that are really not connected to the budget, it would be good if we could hold them to the next regular board meeting. But if there's something you really wanted to ask tonight, that's okay to do at this time.
Bridget, this is Brian again. I actually had a question unrelated to the agenda. I don't actually know. Can I do that now?
Yep.
So my question was for David. It's about synchronous meetings. I know that the high school at least started off having sort of group chats for maybe a week, but then there were concerns about privacy raised. I think that was the issue. I'll say that I've heard from some students and parents who would like to have those meetings again if possible, and I wondered about the possibility of using like an avatar or just your name to avoid questions of privacy and intrusion.
So I'll call on, I think Mike Martin's on, I think Patrick's on too, but let me just, you know, we're in a, what I would say, a a progression moving here coming up next Monday, actually, to what we're going to be calling continuity of learning. And that's going to see, a little bit more of a shift even for the high school and the middle school. But I don't know, Mike, are you on? And then
Patrick raised his hand too,
okay.
David.
Yeah. So let me go with Mike, and then if Patrick wants to pipe in. Mike?
Yeah, so we're just trying to dot our I's, so we're doing that in an intentional, we're proceeding with intention, so we're thinking about privacy concerns, we're thinking about clear guidelines for teachers, families, and students. And so we also wanted to be purposeful in the approach, so we're thinking that video conferencing, we're recommending that it be used for advisories, teacher advisories, and for that social connection piece, and for teachers to not try to replicate their class, like direct instruction, through synchronous meeting times. So we're recommending on the direct instruction side, recommending more asynchronous approach, like a flipped classroom approach. And so we're pulling together a lot of the guidance and directions and resources for teachers and for families. And so starting really next week on the 13th, we're looking forward to expanding some of the stuff that's already happening in places in the middle school and the high school, expanding that downward.
Oh,
Thank
that's
you,
wonderful.
Mike.
Yeah, I was speaking specifically about the sort of social, the homeroom stuff, not the actual instruction. So that's great.
Yep.
So I want to shift to Patrick here in just a second, but not everybody knows who each other are, but Mike Martin, he's our Director of Learning in the district. And I think Patrick is on. Patrick Burke is the principal at the high school. And Patrick, you want to add anything to that?
I don't have much to add. It's been, we just have made it clear in our handbooks for students, teachers, and families relative to this shift that at any time, students have the option to basically mute their camera during any one of the events that are happening through video conferencing. We've also seen, to echo what you're saying, Brian, a number of clubs and sports teams, as well as there's actually a student council meeting tonight, I think. And so the students have been using some video conferencing in order to help get their social needs met. And there are some places where we are also using that in terms of our educational program.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you all.
Thank you. We do have one written question at this point. It's somewhat related to the budget. David, I don't know if you want to take it now. It's more about the ed fund in general, though. Would you like to take that now or when we're talking through the budget itself?
Your choice, Bridget.
Why don't we go ahead and take this question because it's not directly related to the budget itself. It's more related to the state level. Christy Stern asks, thank you to all of the school board members for your continued hard work. Mark Perot, an analyst with the Joint Fiscal Office of Vermont, just stated the educational fund is insolvent at this point. Fiscal projections are that the fund will lose $89 million in revenue due to COVID-19. If the education fund can't give its portion to SB, will we have to pay the difference in our city taxes? If the ed fund requires Vermont to take a loan, will we as Vermonters see an increase in our state taxes? Is it possible that SB taxpayers may see an increase in our city and state taxes due to the increased budget and the state education fund's insolvency?
So that's the complicated answer, I would say. The ed fund, as you know, has always been in somewhat of turmoil, in every year. We never quite know how that's going to end. Obviously, this is an unprecedented time. We don't really know how we're going to end. As you know, in past years, they've had to, backfill the ed fund or move funds in different places. And as most people know, the ed funding model does not require the yield to be set in finality until the legislature is close to adjournment. And so that will be in play for not just us, but everyone in the state of Vermont, those of us that have not yet passed budgets and those that have. So again, I think it's certainly a question, but it's not something significantly different than what we've had to deal with in past years.
Okay. I think that's it in terms of questions. I'm just triple checking to make sure there are no hands raised. I see no hands raised at this point. So unless there are no other comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda, I'm assuming the answer is no, since no more hands are raised. We can move on to amendments to the agenda. Are there any tonight?
There is not, Bridget.
Okay. Then we will move right into item number 4. Consider the South Burlington School District budget for FY 2021. And I just wanted to mention again, for those of you who have not been part of a board meeting or still getting used to board meetings, we'll hear a presentation from administration. There will be some questions and discussion amongst the board. Then we will take written questions for those of you who feel more comfortable submitting questions that way. Then we will answer verbal questions and comments for those who have hands raised in the Zoom meeting. And then we will wrap it up with any final comments or discussion from the board. And then tonight we're warned for action. So we'll see at that point whether we're in a position to vote on the budget that would go on the ballot. So that will be the process for tonight. So with no further ado, David and team, would you like to?
Sure. So thanks, Bridget. I think you set us up really, really well for number 4. We did move over item 3 on the COVID-19. I know it's probably aren't looking at the agenda. I'm happy to do a quick update on that before we go to budget. Is that still okay to do?
That is okay. You know what? I am probably looking at an old paper copy of the meeting. So apologies that I missed that one. Yep.
And I can be fairly quick. I think everybody is safe to know that we continued to move through COVID-19 and trying to figure out, I think you heard a snippet from Mike and Patrick through the question that Brian asked around how we are doing. Again, similar to what I said last week, you know, administrators, teachers, staff, food service, transportation, HR, you know, payroll, etc. People are just, you know, stepping up to the plate and making it work. You know, there's some great stories around connections. There's some great stories around kids that are excited to see us or see us either, you know, making connections through video connections, as you've heard, or through phone calls, or for dropping off food and materials. Currently, as things have continued, I think everybody knows that we've increased social distancing and we've gone to masks more now in many of our different areas now where we're doing things. We continue to provide childcare as well at the Rick Marcotte School. Fairly low numbers, that may change. We're under 10 at the present time, but again, that may change as things go on. We are continuing, again, great work by the nutrition service, Gary Marcus and his team around breakfast and lunch, and just figuring out how we logistically do that on a day-by-day basis is just outstanding. Some other things that are going on, we were asked to close all of our playgrounds, which is kind of sad, but again, to try to help social distancing, that has happened. We've also closed the turf at the high school, but the track is open and there's signage on the track to try to keep, you know, allow appropriate social distancing as well. So again, you heard earlier about the continuity of learning plans as we move into starting on April 13th, and we'll keep you posted. But again, we hope that everybody's doing their part and helping to bring this to an end sooner rather than later. We're certainly doing our part, and I'm proud of everyone who's doing that in the school district. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Bridget, can I ask a question real quickly?
Sure, absolutely. Martin, we lost your sound.
Unmute, Martin. There we go. There we go. So we had a meeting with the legislators a little over a week ago, I guess it was. And there was one question that you had about the days counting towards 175 days. And I'm just wondering if you need any further information on that particular issue or not, because that was unresolved during that discussion.
I don't think. Yeah, thank you, Martin. I don't believe it's totally resolved, but at this point, the continuity of learning and the plans that you've heard Mike articulate and Patrick and how we're doing education K through 12, we certainly feel at this point, we're going to be compliant, and we feel like the state likely will come out with some very specific direction that we will end school, similarly in the state of Vermont around that same projected June timeframe. Nothing in final has come out, but we're quite confident that that will happen. It's important, I think, for everyone to have that a known date, and that our current activities are going to count to a complete school year. So I think we're close, Martin. Thanks.
Okay, and one other related question then is, I assume that our April break will still occur, because otherwise we would be going over the number of days we have for our teachers.
Yep, another good one. I was going to try to get out a note today, but I have not. I'll probably get it out first thing tomorrow. That will go to parents, guardians, and staff and community. Basically, exactly that, letting them know that we will be honoring the April break, and that we also, with parent conferences, with all of the current connections that are happening, K through 12, we won't be having what we used to have as more formal conferences. We feel that those are happening, and we want to make sure that parents, if they want additional time, can express that through their teacher or their contacts that they're having. So those are a couple of things that we'll be updating, but you're absolutely right. April break, and again, guidance came out from AOE today that is the expectation to hold April breaks.
All right, thanks.
Great, thank you. I'm just double checking to make sure there are no hands raised about COVID-19. And I see none. So we will move on to the budget discussion.
Thank you, Bridget.
Yeah.
So we're I don't want to think that everybody, the same group was on, so we're going to go quickly through this again. Amity and myself, along with Gary, and when called upon, if you ask other questions, I'm happy to pull in other administrators that are also online too. This one was our original town meeting budget. I know it's a busy slide. Highlighted in yellow in the upper right-hand corner are the factors that determine for us a good number of parts of what makes our tax rate. The property yield, which we talked about earlier, and the CLA, our number of equalized pupils. Moving down on our overall adjusted expenditure, you see where we are now at the 7.96, and then the 11.22% tax rate, which is what was first went before the voters and was rejected. We then moved on to the next one. Actually, this is what was in that budget. We had 2 classroom teachers, all the way down through the repayment of the bond line of credit. So again, those have not changed. And we do have a little bit of a tracking piece on the FTEs on that corresponding page. Moving on next, this was our March 25th board meeting where we talked about a revised budget. We made some reductions, and you see those where that reduction is noted. And the expenditure came down to 6.80, and the tax rate 9.74. The factors up in the right-hand corner actually did not change because those stay static. Factors that attributed to that budget, we made some reductions. We had some additional staff retirements. We took out safety software and all the way down to some supply expense. So we reduced by 600,119. Moving on, this was a mistake last meeting, and we had received responses from the public offering some really quite specific suggestions on where we could find possible reductions. I think it's important to note that we did recognize some of those along the way and have implemented those into some of our current proposals. But unfortunately, we did not paste all the all the answers last meeting into that. So we wanted to respectfully finish those. And I'm going to ask Amity, I think we'll go through these pretty quickly again, but we'll try to do them in complete form. So I'm going to turn it over to Amity to walk you through about these 3 pages or so of questions that came from the public. Amity.
Thank you, David. So we spoke last week about the annual spending that we do with our one-to-one program computers, and if there was any way we could either defer or find some savings within that area. And so we did take a close look at some options that we could see some savings, and our director of IT worked with his staff, and what we have decided to do is implement, instead of Dell laptops, we would be able to do the Chromebooks for starting in replacement cycles now for the high school. So those are a much less expensive device, but it will still allow our students to have the access to their curriculum and maintain their studies as they are today. So that was one area we did realize some savings. It's and it's a savings that will save us over time, not just this coming FY21 budget, but over time each year as those are replaced, they are a lesser expensive device. Some areas of the supplies and materials were looked at, trying to be as flat as we could, and truthfully the supplies themselves are close to flat from FY19, but within those expense lines are more than just classroom and office supplies. It also represents fuel for our buses, software maintenance agreements, and purchasing of software, and that actually makes up 37% of that $300,000 increase from the FY19 actuals. And these expenses are to continue the education models with our one-to-one program, as well as our administrative functions, such as our accounting software and our student information systems. We did do a cut in supply lines from our first budget presentation, and that was about a $36,000 reduction. The conference and professional development area, education is a constantly changing, and the needs of our students change, and the teachers need to have that development to keep up with state requirements. And we also have collective bargaining contracts that do have professional development outlined in those. So we are only up 1,000 over the FY20 budget, but we do need to continue our professional development for all our staff. Moving on to advertise to inform our voters regardless or regarding, any items that need to be voted upon or publicly announced. And so we do not have a full-time communication professional devoted to doing this work. So we are paying the other paper for their advertising, and we also advertise through the website School Spring, which is not a free service. So unfortunately, that's how we get our jobs posted on the internet. So the FY21 is lower than our actual expenses were in FY19, but we are legally required to keep our voters informed, and we must budget to do so. Starting here on this slide, the proposed level funding that was offered up through the community, and some areas for us to look at again, was purchased services, both professional and technical. And the thought was maybe we could reduce 75% of that. So the majority of the professional services relates to contracts that we maintain with providers for services for students who need extra assistance. Long ago, we determined that these contracts are the most cost-effective way to meet the needs of our students on IEPs and 504 plans, and we are legally obligated to provide these services. The amount in the budget reflects our best estimate and the level of services that our students will need for the next school year. The largest of the increase in the purchased technical services relates to increased maintenance on equipment the district owns and abatement services that may be needed when we do any kind of facility project, such as flooring, or even if we are just to repair a roof, we often must go through the abatement process to make sure that we are safe and our buildings are safe. There is also an increase in this category related to our benefit plan administration. That has been challenging for us over the last few years with the state transitioning to the new healthcare plans. We have to budget accordingly to what those expenses be. Also, The other expense increase in this area is for our private pre-K providers that we must pay under Act 136. Each year, the State Agency of Education sets this rate per student, and then for FY21, that rate increases by $89 per student, and our numbers of pre-K students. Another factor that we were, asked to look at was tuition. And this category relates to tuition that we pay to other providers for services that our students can't receive within the district. Some of those being special education students. Also, it includes our technical center tuition. And there are more students taking advantage of that opportunity. So there's that factor that we also, each school district across the state is required by law to pay a portion to the vocational centers that is not even related to our own specific students. It's a statewide calculation, and the state gives us that number, and we must budget that as well. The special revenue funds, the increase that was showing in that special revenue fund of $76,184, it directly ties to federal grants that we receive annually. And we set our FY21 budget based on our FY20 actual allotted grant amounts. And so often when we're building our budget, we have known expenses such as our staff. So we budget them in the staff or in the salaries and benefit lines. But if we don't know exactly where we'll be spending those funds in the coming year, we place the remaining amount of that grant in purchase service category. And it's directly offset by revenue. So it's not an additional expense. It just means we're getting more revenue. So we will be able to spend that in expenses. And our contingency, it does look strange when you look at it that we've only spent $65,000 and a large sum of money. However, we have to expense the funds where they belong, such as salaries and benefits. When we settle a contract, what we have to do is move an internal budget number, but we can't actually expense it from the contingency. There are very few things that actually come out of our contingency budget. So it does look like it's a very large budgeted dollar amount with very little spending. However, that's not actually how the accounting side of it is done. And in 2019, under a different business manager, we did under budget in the contingency category. And as a result, we were unprepared to absorb additional expenses that actually resulted from several factors, many of them being the tuition students that attend, our tuition students that pay tuition are attending the tech center. So it's a larger expense with a little lesser revenue. And then we ended FY19 with a deficit because we hadn't been giving ourselves any cushion in our contingency. So we would argue that a contingency of 1.06% of the 55 million is really low, given, there's no other reserves for our district to fall back.
Amity, before you go on, which is great, I just one correction on page 8 on the pre-K. I don't want people to get confused that there's a new act. It's Act 166.
Oh, 66. Yes, sorry.
Act 166. I don't want to confuse people that there's more acts, but no problem. Thank you.
Thanks for the clarity. Typo.
No worries.
Okay, and another section that the community asked us to look at was our new hires and salaries. And so the administration area was one that they thought we should be able to see some savings. And Mr. Young has described previously how this district operates a very lean in terms of our administration, much more than districts our size and close to our size have. The district has no assistant superintendent, as many school districts do, and there's only one principal at each of our elementary schools rather than a principal and an assistant. And our enrollments are rising on those elementary schools. With regard to specific recommendations, the 2 assistant principals at the high school have very distinct and full workloads. The 9th grade dean will be needed in particular this coming FY21 year, as the entering freshman class is expected to be the largest in the high school history.
Amity, or maybe perhaps since Mike is on, he could just speak a little bit to what the 9th grade dean actually does and how they will be supporting those entering freshmen this year.
Yeah, I'll that would be Patrick. I have asked Patrick maybe just to give a little more detail on the ninth grade dean. Patrick, are you on?
Sure, happy to. That position is actually a regular ed support staff position. It's and what she does is focus specifically on working with ninth graders as they come into the school, and also working with ninth graders and their families. Probably about I don't know, maybe half of the bumps in the road in terms of adjusting to high school, both from a academic standpoint, but also from a behavioral standpoint. Probably half of what we have to deal with can be attributed to ninth graders as part of their transition. And so her specialty and background is actually in the social work field, and she brings a lot of those skills in order to make sure that kids and families are accessing external services, as well as the internal programming and whatnot that we have to support grade 9 students.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you for that. Sorry for putting you on the spot like that.
Okay, so we'll continue on with regard to the elementary school and the new hires that are proposed. And the only legal way to optimize our enrollment among our elementary schools is to do a redistricting. And that's a very long and extremely challenging process. And it may need to be done at some point. We certainly can understand, as we are getting very concerned about capacity issues at Central School and Orchard School. But if so, it would need to be a very thoughtful and deliberate process with lots of community input and notice for families who would need to transition to a different school. This is not something that can be done on an annual basis, with the expectation that children and families can adjust each year to a different school. Our salary and wages category. Salary and wage increases by law must be determined at the bargaining table. The board is currently in negotiations with all 3 of our union units, teachers, support staff, and administrators. None of the terms proposed by either side in any of the negotiations has been shared with the public yet, and there is much work to be done in each of these negotiations. In setting a budget, district staff must make its best estimate regarding how these negotiations may turn out and ensure that there is enough contingency in the budget to cover the possible outcomes. For the non-union support staff and administrators, you will see that the administration has proposed to reduce the budget to help lower this expenditure increase. So we have done our due diligence to try to bring those costs down as best we can without shorting ourselves as a district. Some other areas of reduction that we were asked to consider, and that was substitute teachers. This expense line was budgeted based on our actual experience in 19, which is the most recent year that we have the full set of data. And I can tell you, as I do budget to actual reports each month, that we are running a little ahead of even where we were at this time in FY19. Now things have changed, obviously, so we may end up seeing some savings in that line. That money then would be rolled into a fund balance and moved into our FY22 budget cycle. We have been improving policies and procedures around sick time and leave time to be used appropriately. We do not believe there's a widespread abuse of these current policies. We just have seen an uptick in babies being born, and there's a lot of what we would call the sandwich generation, where some of our staff is having to care for children and for parents. And we have the laws that we have to abide by with the FMLA and the VPFLA. Contingency, once again, was raised in this set of questions, and we have addressed that already. And it would be, poor for us not to plan and have too much of a shortfall in our contingency. We have done that, and it certainly doesn't work historically. Our lunch and recess, lunchroom and recess aides, the line in the budget book, there was an error, and so that FY21 budget number was entered under the office aid and substitute budget line, and vice versa. So it looked like a very large increase in our recess and lunchroom aid positions, and that was just an error in the 2 account numbers being reversed. And transportation, without compromising safety or service levels, that is simply not possible to reduce by 25%. We are operating with very few drivers that we should have optimally, and it results in a lot of combining bus routes, late and early drop-offs and pickups on a very regular basis. And in order to achieve savings of the proposed magnitude of this proposed magnitude, we would need to implement a policy change that limits transportation for children who live in a certain distance. We may have to widen that. The last time this was attempted, there was significant pushback from the community. Bus transportation reduces traffic for the whole community and has been shown in other districts to improve school attendance. In addition, transportation spending is offset by over $600,000 in our other revenue line. That is reimbursement from the state education fund. If we reduce transportation spending, that revenue will also decrease, meaning that the net effect on the budget would be lower than the proposed estimate. We have made a proposal to reduce the co-director position in the 21 budget, and there may be a need going forward to relook at the walking radius to adjust that policy, and that will take a little bit of time, and it can't be done for the FY21 budget cycle. I believe that covers all of the questions that were raised from the community. I don't know if there's more that the board has to ask or would like more clarity on. Happy to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Amity.
Any questions from the board on those specifically? Why don't we save questions for the community? We'll ask questions about the whole budget presentation. So I think we have a little bit more to get through in terms of what administration is proposing as the actual budget for FY21. So let's keep moving through that if we could.
Yep, you got it, Bridget.
Bridget, I had a couple comments or questions here.
Sure.
One on the computer spending. I know there was some feedback on extending the leases, which my recollection is we have done that pretty routinely over the years, that if we're able to go from 3 to 4 and potentially 5-year leases, that we do that. Also, there was a question about whether or not families who were in a position to could supply computers or Chromebooks for their children if they were able to. And I know that's kind of come up in the past, but I know the response I've gotten, and anybody can augment this if they want to, is one, we can't really require that as a public school system, but also the issues that it brings up operationally in terms of standardizing equipment around maintenance and repairs, as well as the service contracts for the software. And lastly, equity issues between families that can or can't do that or choose not to become an issue. So I did want to reinforce that in the current assessment. Anything else there, David or Gary?
No, I think you're on point, Elizabeth. And again, you're exactly right. We know that there's good intention sometimes around trying to have, ask parents maybe to supply their own. But what we know on the back end or the front end, whichever way you want to think about it, what we put on there so that kids can avail themselves to the right programs, so there's consistency across the curriculum. Those are critically important. And then if one doesn't work, how we then give them a floater computer if it's not one that's connected, then those add to the complications. So I don't know, Mike Martin is on, and I think, Mike, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think I was going to say the same thing. I think that when we have folks bringing in different devices from home across different platforms, it's really hard to keep up our firewalls, antivirus software, and also to maintain solid authentication with our network. So it becomes a little bit trickier. And then also from the standpoint of pushing out software that we want to make universally accessible for folks. So it's appealing. The idea is appealing, but in practice, it doesn't work that well. And then we also looked at the possibility of trying to stretch, having students hang on to devices one more year. And I think the calculus was that we'd have so many repairs as they come up to the end of their life cycle that it would be actually more expensive to be doing all these repairs and from a support standpoint, like David said.
Yeah, and I made this at the last meeting too. When we made the shift again some years ago, we were thinking about iPads to help augment kind of this new way. And we made a conscious effort as a district to go with the laptop device. And I think important to say we gained some important space back and rooms that were computer labs that were dedicated, to our elementary, middle, and high school students. And those rooms came available to us because we were no longer dependent and did not need to also continue to buy desktops. Again, I'm sitting in the library here at the middle school. There used to be, these cubicles were lined with computers, and we had many rooms that had computers, and then we no longer do that. There was a savings or a reduction in not having to do those as well. So I think, again, that's just how things have evolved over the years. Thank you.
Another question I had on the, I'll just go in order that I was jotting these down. On the 9th grade dean position, is that a one-year position that's associated with the high influx of 9th graders?
No, it is not. It has been, the 9th grade dean has been part of our high school for many years. And as Patrick alluded to earlier, it is not, and it's not within the administrative group. Again, it's an important part of the administration at the high school, but the dean is not an administrator. Again, Patrick, I think, appropriately alluded to her skills in high-level social work and making those connections and welcoming our 9th grade. And that has been ongoing for, again, I don't know how many years, but certainly I would say at least 15, 16, maybe more.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I just misunderstood that might have been a new hire, so
Yep.
Sorry about that.
Nope.
The other thing I wanted to just mention around the optimizing enrollment among schools is there's been quite a bit of discussion in past board conversations about, as new developments come on, that we might consider identifying developments with schools in the near proximity where there may be some additional space. So that would be under consideration. That wouldn't necessarily require an entire redistricting. That Amity kind of talked about taking more time and input from the community, just as a thought there. On page 11, I know the board has looked into quite a bit the trends on substitute teachers over time. And I think, Amity, you alluded to this, but the numbers themselves can vary quite a bit year over year based on particularly maternity leaves, which are, you use the acronym, but for folks who aren't aware of FMLA, it's Family Medical Leave Act. So those individuals that are able to take advantage of that federal law and benefit are definitely can change the substitute teacher trending numbers on a year over year basis by adding one additional person. I know I've seen it swing a fair amount. So for what that's worth. And those were just my observations or questions. Thank you, Bridget.
Thank you. Thanks for those questions. Okay. So I think, David, back over to you and/or
Sure.
Amity. I'm not sure who's going to make the rest of the presentation.
Yep. Well, we're kind of going together here on this one. We're going to actually move next to the proposed reductions here in just a second. And this list is the list that you saw last time, board and community. I recognize that it's hard and small, so it strains the eyes a little bit. The way this was organized was C's, B's, A1s, and A2s. And administratively, obviously we've spent a lot of time. This certainly is not an easy process. It triggers a lot of emotions. All of the positions that have been identified and or needs have been validated and supported. That said, when we look to make reductions, we try our very best to keep the reductions, as far away from students initially. But obviously, as you move down that list, you needed to get more into the students. The direction that we received from the last board meeting was the board, I wouldn't say was comfortable, but understood the conditions and provided some direction to me to be able to kind of categorize the C's and the B's, but there were some cautions that were identified that allowed us administratively to go back and evaluate some of those items. So highlighted in green, again, I want to be clear that there are some positions in here that I'm not proposing to reinstate. And I know that that is difficult because in some cases they're connected to people. But at the same time, I do need to stand firm on reductions or a reduction target, as that was an important goal as well. So adding back in the district special education clerical positions, and I think as you heard Joanne Godek articulate at the last meeting, because the change in the funding model is coming, but it is not going to come next year, there still is a high amount of work that is needed by the clerical positions to support the special educators. And obviously, when special educators are in the building, we would like them to spend the majority of their time working with the students and working with teachers to accommodate the students and not on coordinating, scheduling the logistics. So we felt that was important at all locations to go back in. And so we've made that allocation, and we've you see that reflected as 0 on the reduction amount. The other is the district ITE piece, and both of these I would say are further magnified by the fact that the state that we're currently in, we're going to need, I think, all of our special educators paying attention to the students as we are with our ITE staff. And again, as you heard at the last meeting, we're very proud of our staff district-wide, but certainly our ITE staff as well, as they've been instrumental in helping us to provide the level of connectivity, the support, and the systems through our laptops and devices to allow teachers and staff to connect. So that's actually, that was a slight reduction, but that's back in as well. In blue, we've identified from the A1s and the A2s that we felt we could reduce, and that would help augment those above reductions or the above re-inclusion numbers. And that is in part at the high school, eliminating some of our assistant coaching positions. And so you see there's a $9,000 reduction there. Again, when we made some combined, this is particular to football, when we combined with Burlington because of low enrollment, obviously we were sensitive to both teams. We brought a good number of coaches from both sides, so this does allow for that reduction. There's a 0.2 reduction in high school business and health education. And so that again is a reduction there of a 0.2. The library after school support position, again, has a slight reduction there. And then at the high school, visual and performing arts will reduce 1 section. And so those are the offsets, if you will, to that. What that then does bring you, again, Amity has put a red line that brings you down to where you are currently in the proposed, with a total expenditure of 3.80 and a tax rate of 5.91. Why don't I just finish this, Bridget, and then we'll come back. So I'm going to move quickly to page 14. 13 was a continuation of the A1s and A2s. Page 14 is our budget workshop sheet, which I think people are pretty familiar with. This is, again, a busy sheet that we saw in the earlier presentation. This one actually reflects the numbers that I just shared with you. The 3.80 on the total expenditure, the 5.91 on tax rate. On 100,000, again, I'm on the right side in the orange. On the $100,000 of assessed value, it would be $95 increase. There would be 219 on the average condo and 319 on the average home. This is, again, an interactive sheet. One of the things that I've said, and I will do this just once here. I'm going to ask Amity to change up in the upper right, just to be able to show you what the effect of the common level appraisal is. We're just going to shift that. I'm going to ask her to shift it back to the 93.28. And so that's 93.28. You see the tax rate drops to 2.10. Again, that's kind of how that particular effect is. So again, thank you, Amity. Next page is the enrollment numbers. Again, I won't spend a ton of time here, but this is where you see the allocation of teachers. And I know there's been some folks in the community that have asked questions about what the reductions are. Amity, do you have that sheet? I'm gonna keep going. If folks don't have this presentation, it is also posted to this whole presentation is posted on our district webpage. And it's right there on the front, just to the right of the COVID-19 update. So if you want to look at this packet, you can. This particular just walks you through the elementary schools. Rick Mark out on the bottoms of the current, as of April 1, you see our current enrollments. A little hard for you to read, but you can see, where we are at a plus 27 forecasted over next year, and you can see the enrollments. This does have 2 additional teachers going from 19 to 21. For Rick Marcotte moving down, Chamberlain's moving from 15 to 16, and you see the corresponding, the April 6th proposed in there. Again, this is keeping the number of teachers that were initially requested constant in this particular elementary focus. Orchard remains at 22. So the elementary total is on the very bottom. Middle school and high school are corresponding on the top right. But remember, some of those positions that we talked about are not necessarily captured in this particular slide where it's the core of staff, but there are some in the high school there. And then lastly, before again, open up for board questions, Bridget, would be just with the change in the expenditure and then the corresponding tax rate at the 591, you see the 5-year and the 10-year averages. So at the change in the tax rate, a 5-year average would be 0.99%, and then the 10-year average would be 1.93. The spending 5-year is 3.27, and the 10-year average would be 2.49. So I don't know, back to you, Bridget, on questions that you may have, or board.
I think it would be really helpful, at least for me, if we're going to ask questions about the budget, to go back to the spreadsheet that was shared with the different things that are potentially coming out of the budget. So that line by line.
Page 12.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, I think, to get that back up.
You got it?
I am happy for other board members to go first. I do have a lot of questions, as I did last time, but if someone else would like to have a crack first, I would be happy to look to each other first.
This is Brian. I guess I, for one, would like to hear more about the district transportation director, not only how it affects the transportation itself, but my understanding is if we did not have this position, it would be covered by Gary Marcris. If that's true, I'm wondering how that affects, the work that he normally does.
So I think, good question, Brian. For a long time, we had, just a single coordinator. Again, we added a co-coordinator position there to give some redundancy and obviously different skill sets. With the retirement of one of the co-directors, again, making hard decisions on reductions, we do think that, or I do think that the assistant director with some additional, really, I would say additional guidance from Gary and folks, I think will be okay. We also, through Gary's leadership, we have some software called TransFinder. That's a software routing system that will take a lot of the kind of very difficult planning that happens on an ongoing basis for route description, route planning, timing, etc. And getting that system in place, I think will help us significantly be more efficient. I do not want to say that we won't have to address this in the years forward, but we're also trying to do some very difficult decisions in difficult times. And this is one area that, I feel we can appropriately do.
And as long as it's up there on the screen, I'm curious about 2 lines below that, line number 15, the district IT help desk staff. I guess I'd be curious to know how much we've needed those resources in the past few weeks since transitioning to online learning. And given the likelihood that, there may be some of this in the fall too, if this disease is cyclical or if there's a second wave that comes or if it acts like the flu. So how much would we need this position to help with remote learning in the fall?
Yeah. So again, good question, Brian. And I'm going to call on Mike here in just a second. For me, it's amazing when we first I don't think I'm a good example because I need a lot of technical support, but as we began the journey of devices, I think, there was an uphill battle, trying to make sure students were ready and able and supported. But as we've gone along the way, our students coming through our systems are pretty darn competent about technology and how to use them and how to care for them. So we'll always have a need because they're devices. But that said, I think we have definitely seen that, there's a lot of independence as we've increased the competency. And Mike, I don't know, you want to add anything to that or?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I would say, I just want to give props to our IT and our ITE folks. There's no way we could have gotten things in place to provide online learning, some of this remote learning that we have in place with our continuity of learning plans. So we owe them a debt of gratitude. And I think this just reflects tough choices. It's not because we couldn't use that position in the fall. We could definitely find work for that person. I think it's just a part of the tough choices when we're looking at class sizes, when we're looking at reducing classroom teachers, kind of a shared sacrifice approach.
Well, not to beat the dead horse, but in the implication column there, it talks about serving staff in a timely manner too. I mean, given that some of our teachers are, middle-aged or older, how have they been doing, and how will they be doing, and might they need this position?
That's a really good. I just want to say that we've been blown away by we have ITE staff. They're Brian. They're the folks that principally work with teacher learning in the area of technology. So we have three of those folks on staff. This is more on the tech support side. So this is on the help desk side of things. So it's more on the hardware stuff. So that's, I think, what David was referring to. As we have systems in place, we have fewer problems there. This spring, with devices going home, we have a great demand in that area. So we'll have to see how things go. But like I said, tough choices all around. And I think this was held in balance against classroom teaching positions.
Yep. Thanks for the distinction, Mike.
Yeah.
One last thing I would add is, obviously if we had a whole bunch of different devices that we were trying to support and trying to, repair, fix, and ship away, that would definitely put some added challenges. And I think the other thing that the help desk has done well is if a student or even a staff member comes in with a problem, they have, I think they call them hot swaps, where they can, we don't have an abundant number of them, but we can swap a computer out, and that allows for individuals to continue with either their teaching and or students learning opportunity. And again, most of the stuff is stored up on, the systems that they work from and not on the specific device. So anyway, thanks.
Brian, did you have any more questions before we move on to someone else?
No, that's kind. Thank you, but I'm all set.
Okay. Elizabeth, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I'll unmute myself. I just have it's more of a general question. I mean, I believe that administration has done, some of the tough prioritizing of things here. This is really a question around any of the FTEs. What would be the risk of putting all the FTEs that are identified here in a contingency with the specificity that you have on pages 12 and 13, and leaving some flexibility to assess the need as we get closer to a start of an actual school year. And I'm thinking primarily of our past experience, for instance, with fluctuating kindergarten enrollments, but I'm also wondering if that might be an opportunity to think differently about once we understand the impact of the time frame of COVID and restarting school. I'm just throwing that out as kind of a what if and asking probably our assessment of risk in the moment, but just a thought looking at this.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking, Elizabeth. I think important to note, we do have a contingency teacher in there. We're worried, we're watchful about the Orchard community. And again, Mark, I think, is on too, but, we've seen that particular school enrollment really increase. And, we've had some large class sizes there, particularly in kindergarten. So that contingency teacher is in part related to the FTE and some sectional availability for the high school as well. So those are what I would say are some plugged FTEs. I think it would be hard, to put another number in there. We do at times enter the school year with, what we have, and then we find out that, there's a student or two that is in need of some additional support. And requires maybe a one-on-one teacher or something of that nature. And so those are hard to back into, but I would also say that they're also hard to plan for. And financially, particularly during this type of financial difficulty, I'd be hard pressed to put it in beyond what we've already have for contingent.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting these aren't well thought out and would reflect what we would do, assuming all our 2,500 plus students are back in our facilities at the start of the school year. We know that any potential surplus we might run would roll over into a subsequent fiscal year, correct?
Yes.
So I'm just suggesting, is there any benefit to looking at all FTEs? Because that we know that's where the biggest expenses in terms of wages and benefits, of looking at that. Even if the board were to approve the budget as proposed, you've got the outline of specific positions, but looking at that net dollar amount as a contingency and hiring against it, as we know what's happening between now and the start of school year, when we would expect it in late August or early September.
Yeah. So I think I honing in more on your question here, understand. Part of that, of course, we have some collective bargaining agreements that we need to pay attention to, based on timing and need. And then, of course, we have a variety of other staff that support. So I think as things unfold in our year to come, my hope is that we'll gain some more clarity around what we're going to need. I don't know. I'm not really sure about this. I'm in uncharted territory in that particular thought or idea. I'd have to put some more thought into, what you're suggesting.
Okay. Yeah, just a thought as I'm looking at the components in A1 and A2.
Mm-hmm.
David or Amity?
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
I believe one of the items affected the mentoring program. Is that still in this list of reductions? And if so, can you scroll up to where it is so I can take a look, please?
It's already on the screen, Alex. It's the Healthy Schools position. Yeah, it's the Healthy Schools.
Aha. Well, I was trying to keep my glasses off here.
Yeah, I had a question about that specific position as well. So maybe I'll add to Alex's question about the mentoring program. But if this part of this position, because it looks like it's half an FTE, is eliminated, who will handle diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and who will continue the mindfulness work that we've worked pretty hard to get into the schools? Who will be responsible for that if this position is cut down by half?
Yeah, good question. So with mentorship, again, critically important. This is, again, our community mentor to our students. It's been instrumental. That would continue. We have an individual that would continue that work. On the Healthy Schools position, again, there is a reduction here of that. And again, critically important to our work. We've spent a good amount of dollars in training, and we've sent many of our staff off to diversity, equity, inclusion training all over the country, actually. And I think this is something that often, I'd love to be able to keep it, but at the same time, we have created, I think, a lot of trainers of trainers within the district. again, we're always in a place where we're needing to check ourselves and recheck ourselves. There will be a need probably on an ongoing basis to bring in some outside support and perspective to continue our journey. But at this point, again, because I think it's the right level of transition and implementation, that it falls under either the director of learning responsibilities as we push out a curriculum and content that we believe is important for our kids to meet our ends. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is included, obviously, within those tenets. And I think similarly around mindfulness and some of those particular practices can also fall under our director of support services. So that's my way of, again, in implementing them into the programs that we have currently running. Obviously, this has been a really important position. We would never be where we are if we did not have the energy, the aptitude, the passion, to bring us where we are today. So again, that's where we are.
Alex, did you have another question or more questions?
No, that's it for the moment. Thank you.
Martin, did you have questions?
I think the three main areas I wanted to talk about have already been hit. So I'll have some comments, but I'll hold those.
Okay. So then I think most of the things I was going to ask were hit. I had a couple of questions about the new ones that were added this week. Well, they weren't new, but they were sort of bumped up against or above the red line. One question I had is, it says for the FHTMS library support position that it will lead to a partial loss of library services. What services would be lost? What would be the change there?
Sure, Bridget. These, again, I think Karsten's on too, but these are the after school components. And again, this was something that was added, I don't know, 3-4 years ago, with the idea to give students some opportunities at the end of the day. And I think Karsten will tell you that it's been important, but it doesn't have a large population of students. And so this was, again, an after school library support position. So Karsten, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Would you like to add anything?
That also, really what it is, there are 2 library aides that we have at the middle school, and this is a partial reduction of the current position. The library aides are also a go-to person for technical support, those kind of things. I spoke with Amy Blauvelt, our librarian. She does believe that she can schedule both library aides appropriately so that we can service the students. And then, after the year, we have to reevaluate how we did.
Thank you, Karsten.
Thank you. And then with regards to visual and performing arts, what section would be lost? Because there are lots of different visual and performing arts. What would be taken away if that partial reduction was made?
Yeah, so I'll call on Patrick here in just a second, but one of the things that I think is important distinction at our high school, and I think one of the reasons that it's popular is that we do have a program of studies that students are able to pick the courses that they want, and then based on that, then a schedule is run by the high school administration and guidance folks to come up with what the schedule is. I think from Patrick's perspective, this is, again, one section of there's many sections, but this is one section that I think he felt that he could do without. I'll let him explain a little more. Patrick, are you on?
Yes. We're just in the early stages of scheduling for next year's program. And as David alluded, the way we do our scheduling is we cobble together the student requests, and then we assign the teaching faculty to meet the requests of the students, and all the way down to the specific courses that students request. This is definitely going to be a visual arts position, not a performing arts position. The visual and performing arts department is one academic department at the high school, but we believe that this will be a visual arts position, and it will come out of either one of 2 places. Either we will offer fewer sections of introductory level visual arts courses, such as Art 1 or pottery or drawing, or it will come from the other side of the program and we might have to contract some of our advanced art courses and maybe offer a combined section of Art 3 and 4, or look at if we're able to, how we're going to best support students for whom art school or attending a university and majoring in art is really in their future. And some of our FTE is dedicated to that at the so-called like higher end of the program. So it will come from one of those two places, and the way that we'll make that decision will be based on which is least impactful once we start running models of our daily schedule for next year.
Thank you, Patrick.
That's helpful.
And just by way of anticipating the next question, the same is true with the health and business ed position. It's we'll wait and see where that will have the least impact on students, and that's how we'll make the ultimate decision of which fewer section we're going to run in health and business ed.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you.
So Bridget, I didn't know if you were wrapped with your questions and comments, but I did see that Cole is among the participants, and I wondered if we could get a comment from him before we move along to general public questions. I don't see Delaney, but she may be there with him.
Cole, would you like to comment?
Yeah, he's all, he can talk if he wants, if he wishes.
Cole, are you there? I still see him as muted.
May not have been ready to speak.
Okay. Cole, can you unmute yourself from your end? Okay, I think we're gonna have to move on.
Yep.
So are there any more board questions or comments? Last call. Oh,
Hi.
There's Cole. There he is. Okay.
Sorry, I missed the question.
The question was just whether you had any, before we open up for community questions and answers, whether you had any comments on David's proposal, or the administration's proposal, I should say. It's the full administration, really. The proposal and where we've kind of gotten to at this stage.
I think the biggest thing that I'm proud of is how the A category has been kind of left as this sacred cow, or however we called the turf way back during master planning and visioning. And I really appreciate that. And I also see how those from the A level that were brought into the cuts for this new budget, how those will have as minimal of an impact as possible. Obviously, there are the small things in B and C that will impact people, but I think that they are, I'd rather have those than the alternative. And so I like this new budget.
Thank you, Cole. Okay, I think if everyone's ready, then we have 4 questions, written questions from the community. And then after that, we will go to people who want to ask questions verbally. So I don't see any hands raised yet. So if you want to start raising hands as we start to go through the written Q&A, we will get hands after we've gone through these few questions that we have in the written Q&A. So the first written question is from Wes Dom. He asks, has there been any staff reductions due to the current situation?
So, Bridget, I'll respond to that. I'm assuming the current situation is obviously the COVID-19 situation. And we, I think as you've heard, our staff are not in the buildings, although we have transportation and nutrition services and custodians full up, and some administrative assistants in various places are still in. But for the most part, everybody is continuing to work. There are some individuals that are either out on sick leave or approved family medical leave. Again, I think from my perspective, currently we're trying to make everything continue to work as we would if they were in school. Obviously, security is certainly a big part of helping us as well. Everyone has been pitching into different areas, but currently there's been no reduction. As far as our run rate on our budget, it's still too early to tell. I think there's obviously people know that there's some incentives that are coming either from the state or from the federal government around nutrition services, for instance, maybe transportation. So there may be some possible revenue options that come into that. But again, the whole reason for those dollars is to ensure that we're meeting the needs that we need to. And again, I don't know what the count was today, but nutrition services, transportation are moving somewhere between 600 and 800 meals, lunches, and breakfasts every day. And that may not sound like a big number when you think of our 2,600 students, but when you think about putting those number of breakfasts and lunches together, particularly in the environment that we're in, to try to do it in a way that social distancing is no easy thing. So we've been holding on to all of our staff.
Was there any guidance? I thought I had read somewhere that there was guidance from the state as well to keep people employed for the time being, just not knowing what the further guidance will be in the future about what we're expected to deliver in terms of services for the rest of the school year. I had read somewhere that there was guidance that we were supposed to be trying to keep people employed. Yeah,
that's correct. That is the recommendation. And again, we're doing everything that we can to make sure that everyone is being productive and supportive of the work that we're trying to do, albeit some are being redeployed into different areas. So it may be someone who works with some of our students, paraeducators are in helping with nutrition services and distribution of meals, for instance. So there's a variety of kind of changes happening within, but we have worked hard to honor keeping people employed and keeping them, doing useful things for us. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Tanya Carnady asked if we can go over the CLA impact again. And I thought it was really helpful to have that interactive spreadsheet up, the budget worksheet,
Sure.
to show what it would be if we just had a level CLA from last year.
Yep.
And we might need, just for folks who haven't been on previous calls where we've explained what the CLA is, just to do a 2-second refresher for people who are new or don't remember what the CLA is.
Yep. So I think we could, if Amity, go back to that budget workshop sheet that the board always, again, this is a tool that we've, used for numbers of years now. It does correlate actually to what's in your budget book and the state funding formula. So all the calculations are on. But the question that was asked that Bridget read was about the effect of the CLA, which is in that upper right-hand corner, common level of appraisal. If a home was assessed at, let's just say $300,000 and it sold for $300,000, then you're on point, you're on mark. If a home sells for significantly more than, then your common level of appraisal within your city would drop. And again, this is part of the statewide funding formula that is attributed to how monies are collected. So in this particular example, if you put it back to what we were last year at 93.28, and obviously our equalized pupils does add to that a little, but just so all this is doing is separating the change in the CLA, and with that one change, it drops it down from 5.93, right?
5.91, I think.
5.91, thank you. Yeah, to 2.10. And then if you wanted to see the effect after a reappraisal, if you brought that up to 100%, in other words, all homes were selling at their appraised value, then you'd see what the tax rate would do then. And the tax rate would go down by 4.77%. And so then you'd see the effect on the 100,000 of minus 76. On the average condo would be minus 177, and the home would be 257. Now remember,
yeah, though people's home values would go
that's
up
right.
in that instance. And
that's
so,
right. So if your home was underassessed for a period of time, you were paying less on your personal and more on school tax side. In this particular situation, you'd pay more if your house was reassessed higher, then your taxes would be higher, and you pay them when you pay your property taxes specific to your home value. So anyway, that's just a quick highlight. There's more to be read on that. I think there's, how the calculation happens is I'd be happy to walk people through that a little bit more if anyone would like to, but it would be better to kind of spend it together and look at what the effect is. When I say together, I have to say Zoom together, I guess.
Can I make one more comment about this about this particular? I guess I call it spreadsheet. That's not what it is, but in any event, just really pointing out the fact that we have an expenditure increase of 3.8%, and the fact that we have an increase of equalized pupils of 1.56%. I mean, that that actually leads to that 3.8% not resulting in as high of an increase of the property tax rate. I think it's very critical to understand that a good part of that 3.8% is related to the fact that we have an increasing enrollment in the district. Also, the fact that we have to pay that deficit is pretty significant reason why we have the 2.1% pre-CLA tax rate increase. But one could look at this and think, well, 3.8% increase in our budget, and really it's not leading to as large of an increase in the tax rate until we get, of course, to the CLA. So I think that just needs to be pointed out.
Yeah. The one thing I think is important in this budget workshop sheet too is that what appears on people's ballot by statute is the net spending per equalized pupil percentage, and so that's that 4.35 percentage point. And again, I've alluded to where we have been on our per pupil spending over the years. And again, I think a lot of people think that we are either at the high end spending, but we are not. Again, this past year in FY19, we were 108, and we had 107 schools, districts that spent more than we did. So again, I think that is important. It is a little bit a misnomer sometimes that appears there, because sometimes then I hear that people get that mixed up with either, is that our expenditure increase? Is that our tax rate? So again, I'm just wanting to point that out.
Well, we have to point out that that's by law what has to be on
Correct.
the ballot. So it's confusing for people to see the 5.91 and then go to the ballot and see that it says 4.35. That can be confusing, but that's how we have to report things on the ballot and what voters have to vote on.
And just one more comment on that is the fact that that increase in the per pupil spending, that incorporates, again, the deficit that we're paying back. The other point to make is that when people compare different states and their per pupil spending, you're comparing apples and oranges, because in our budget, the capital expenditures that we make go into that per pupil spending, and that is not necessarily the case in other states, where that is not in fact included in their per pupil spending figures. So,
yep, thank you, Martin. That's exactly right, and that's one of the things that I have challenged a lot of folks when we look at our cost per pupil in Vermont. Unlike others, that's a factor that is not at play for us. We don't, or they don't have that particular piece. The other one last thing on this particular chart is the equalized pupils. Again, these are the number of students that we see on a year-by-year basis, and they get counted again fractionally, because a high school student counts as a little bit more than an elementary student, etc. But when we have an influx in number of seated students, so physical bodied students, that equalized number is on a 2-year roll. So you could have a jump of 100, but you wouldn't see all of that in 1 year. You'd see essentially, it actually doesn't work out quite like this, but about half of that you'd see as your equalized pupil number. So again, you don't get all of that in one. I do find that a little bit hard, because you could have a pretty significant increase, but you have to kind of wait to see that revenue correspond. When the CLA drops, of course, it's a year-by-year effect.
That's right.
yeah, and David, Well, one more thing that I haven't heard you mention too much when talking about CLA is that when the CLA does drop, what it means is that real estate values in South Burlington are going up. And for anybody who's in the real estate market, even if they're just owning a home, that in most cases can be a good thing because your investment is appreciating.
That's right. I mean, I think that you're absolutely right. Part of that, I would say, is part of the attributes of your city, and certainly South Burlington, desirability, availability, and certainly I would be remiss if I didn't say the most important economic engine was education. We hear that all the time from our real estate people are looking at, what brings them here is education. But you're absolutely right. And while it's not easy seeing your taxes go up on your individual property as your house increases in value, but it is an important asset to each and every individual family member. And so when you look at the asset growth of some of our homes on a year-over-year basis, from the time in which they were purchased, some of those are pretty significant asset percentage increases. And so again, it is important to be noted around how the homes are selling in comparison to their appraised value. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. So our next question comes from Margot Nelson Rogers. She says, in one of the recent school board meetings, David Young mentioned that the healthcare costs for administrators were not previously paid for directly through the school budget. Instead, these costs were factored into the administrator's total compensation package and were then borne by the administrators themselves. But in FY 2021, as I understand it, the healthcare costs for administrators will be paid directly through the school budget, not by the administrators themselves. Yet no equivalent reduction was taken from their compensation packages due to this change. In fact, quite the opposite is true. Administrator compensation was increased by 3.9% in FY 2020 and is set to increase another 4.14% in 2021. How do you respond to this? I did not see an adjustment made for this. Given that this seems to be double dipping, wouldn't it be an ideal place to make cuts without any adverse effects to teachers, student programs, and even to the administrators themselves?
Elizabeth
will take that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, I'm happy to. There's sort of two phenomena going on. One is the Senate Ed Committee has forwarded a bill called S-226, which are modifications to Act 11 on the statewide healthcare award that would potentially exclude confidential employees, which include administrators. So that there is the possibility with that particular act that administrators and some other groups of employees that fall into confidential employee category would not be covered under the statewide award. There is no double dipping that goes on because right now those employees who access healthcare benefits through that total compensation are paying 100% of their premiums as well as 100% of out-of-pocket expenses. So there is no offset in this current budget that one anticipates any outcome of negotiations with the Administrator Association, nor any. It would be an offset to 80/20 and about 85% of the out-of-pocket expense if a subset of employees was covered, ultimately was covered, and that would only go into effect for 6 months of the year. It would simply be an offset. So there is, I think the short response is there's no double dipping that's going on in this proposed budget.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. David, did you have anything else to add? I thought that was pretty thorough.
No, I again, on point with healthcare. Obviously, Elizabeth is well versed in that particular area for sure. I think it's important for the community to know is that this administrators have been total compensation for a long time. So that has been their responsibility on healthcare over the years. It's been a number of years, I think 15, 16 or more, 17 years, where they've been in that mode. So when healthcare costs have increased or they've had individual claims, they have been responsible to cover those. So again, as Elizabeth alluded to, there's some changing fabric there, although maybe not. Maybe there's some exemption there too. So Thanks.
Actually, I would add just a quick comment to that. The premium increases have been double digit over the past few years, and the current year is 12.9. Last year, I think, was at 11.3, and a prior year was about 10.8. And those premium increases are absorbed by the administrative folks.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Next question is really, it's mostly a comment from West. Off the topic, is the board aware that Zoom is hackable? A government meeting was hacked and porn was shown. I will say that I was aware of that. I think as a district, we're aware. The struggle is that it's been challenging for community members, I think, to figure out the technology that we're using. We've now used it for a couple of meetings. To try to switch in midstream, in my opinion, would be pretty challenging given where we are. So we're aware that we're taking a certain risk by being on Zoom, and I think they're doing their best to try to patch it. But I don't know if anyone else has anything to add on that particular comment.
No, I think, as you said, Bridget, we are aware that that occurred, and I think we're doing our very best through Zoom to hold a public meeting of the school board, and obviously, if we needed to exercise appropriate responses, we would, just like we would in an open meeting if we needed to exercise, a quick recess or something of that nature if there was something that happened like that. But we certainly hope it does not. We are aware.
Next question is Jeffrey Bennett. I appreciate Superintendent Young's work to create a budget that, for the majority, maintains student programming moving forward, and I continue to admire the administration's work in creating professional development that focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you. My concern is around DEI. The elimination of the district's only dedicated DEI position will put more of a burden on administration with all of their other professional duties to continue to improve our schools in regards to DEI for students and staff. How important is diversity, equity, and inclusion to the district? As a teacher, I value the outside professional development opportunities that we have had access to. As a teacher, I am also concerned about the district's support for DEI initiatives when there is more to do with fewer resources. What is the message we are sending as a district to our faculty, students, and community if we eliminate the 50% dedicated position for DEI? Wouldn't it make sense to increase it to 100%?
So, yeah, thank you for the question, Jeff. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, I said earlier, is important. Me speaking as a white male, I recognize there's privileges that I have that others don't. And again, part of, my training along with others as we've, taken the journey, we've been fortunate to have a coordinator that has allowed us to work on those things. And we now have trainers that are level 1, level 2, and level 3 trainers. We've trained over, I want to say probably 180 of our staff member have gone through at least level 1 courageous conversations. That's nowhere near enough, and I think, as a district, we recognize that our next step is to embed it in our everyday practice. It's not a professional development activity, but it's something that needs to be embedded. And again, my recommendation and move will be to pull it under curriculum and ensure that we're dealing with these on an everyday basis and embedding them into our work that we do in every classroom, every day, as well as I said earlier about mindfulness. So I think that those are critical. Our PD activities obviously are critical and will remain that when we need to make sure we're honing in on and supporting professional development work. We're gonna keep on that target. I don't want to say no, never, that we won't want to come back to this, but it's my hope that we've got a whole bunch of people that are part of, shepherding and supporting the initiatives and the work around diversity, equity, and inclusion on a going forward basis. So we've done the uptick in implementation, and it's my hope that that hard work will maintain us and allow us to carry forward. We probably are going to at times need some shots of professional development or activities that will help do some more, but that's where we are. And again, trying to make some tough decisions around how we support the program that we feel is closest to students. Thanks.
I guess, David, my question around that is there sort of a plan, sort of a transition plan that would be put in place that could tell us, when we feel, like what would tell us as a district that we need some more help, or what is to, basically is there a path that's sort of laid out that we could follow, so that we don't just sort of wait until we run into an issue with diversity, equity, and inclusion before we decide that we need, additional resources, and that what would sort of be the guardrails, if you will, around that.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of hard to know exactly, there's always, I think in all of our work, this is where, an issue is an opportunity, an issue is an opportunity. And we should, my certain expectation is that, I've got great administrators out in the field that are watching, listening, and learning, and teachers that are doing the same. And I think as we've developed more empathy in this particular area, I've got people watching, listening, and learning, and we'll be suggesting back up through what we're calling our continuous improvement plans to say, what, we're seeing some trends right now on some of the social and emotional stuff. We're seeing some upticks in some behaviors. We're seeing some upticks in certain areas, and we need to hone in on those things. So it may be individual student, school driven, it may be whole district driven, but those will be the indicators I think that I would want to see, as it would be driving through our continuous improvement work that every school has, and every school has a team. And then obviously if we're starting to see that there's, as I said earlier, many situations that are coming to the forefront, then we want to put a pause on it and say, what's going on? What are we doing? What are we not doing? And I think to the board, it comes right back to the ends, the academic disposition, personal development, and citizenship. And it's anchored pretty squarely in those around making sure that we're doing that work. Again, this just kind of the synopsis of where we are. What I said earlier too is true, in folding it under the director of learning, and making sure that there's continuity around that work and the continuous improvement plan around our ends metrics.
Okay. Last question that I have in written Q&A so far is Heather Auclair says, the Secretary of State recommended that all votes for April and May be canceled. Why are we not listening to what is being told for everyone's safety?
Thank you, Bridget. So, we're first of all, as the COVID-19 unfolds, we're taking pretty much regular guidance from either the governor's office or the Secretary of Education. We get pretty much daily updates. Most of them are updates. Sometimes they're changes. But as we move forward on a multitude of fronts, I'm losing my train of thought here. Sorry about that. This is a problem when I don't have people right in front of me. About the vote. So we have asked for guidance specifically through the Secretary of State's office, and we do have, we've asked our legal counsel to help us with what would be the opportunities and availability to move our vote, and how best to do that. We also have to work collaboratively with our city clerk's office and how we would do that. Perhaps delaying a month might be better. Again, that's part of what I think the board and I need to talk about. But in some cases, a month from, month, 3 weeks, whatever, may not significantly change. So how can you appropriately gain feedback from the community through a voting process and still exercising social distancing? So, can it be everyone is an absentee ballot that is mailed with returns, postage, so that can happen that way, for instance. So we know that there's guidance out there, and we're asking for some added guidance as well around how we might go forward with a vote. Because remember, we do have contractual obligations too, where we can't just say, well, just delay until whenever. But we do have staff and teachers and administrators that are, would like to know whether they're going to be working next year. So we owe them a contract. And that's part of it as well around the timing of our budget. I don't know if I'm missing that point or not, but.
So just a quick question. So we're not necessarily deciding the date of the vote today, even if we go ahead and vote on the budget. it sounds like we still have some work to do to really understand when the vote will be.
Well, right, yeah, that's right, Martin. But right now, we have set a May 7th voting date. That was done a bit ago before things continue to escalate. So obviously, I think we do need to revisit that date and determine comfort of, how comfortable the board is to move forward, or based on the guidance, which we'll get some more, I think, guidance back in the next couple of days for me to be able to advise the board.
And that will be a vote on the special meeting warning, which is separate than the vote on the budget.
That's right. Tonight, what is being warned for action is the budget. At the recommended, actually, we have the budget workshop sheet up as you see it. That would be what you'd be voting on tonight. At a future time, it would be the warning, which then the warning is what goes then forward to be making up the ballot. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the date.
And the date, yep, that's right. Mm-hmm.
And even though we've talked about May 7th, that's not official until it's been voted on for the special meeting warning.
That's correct, Martin. Thanks.
Thank you. We have two more questions that came up while we were answering that one. Joe Patrici asked, why can't the board give guidance for a 2% budget increase? This is commensurate with the SSI cost of living adjustment, as well as the governor's budget recommendation. A way to do that is an across-the-board salary and benefits cut. The collective bargaining unit process is still open.
So, I've obviously put the budget together, provided, I think the recommendation of the board based on a reduction process. And I think, again, I heard loud and clear from the board that you did not want to significantly affect student programming. And what I'm hearing is that the board came in at kind of the reductions were the C's, B's, and some of those A's that we pushed back in, or we reduced. But that was not what I heard, but I'll let the board more specifically respond.
Can I comment on that as well? This is something I wanted to comment earlier or later, and that is it's not optimal what we're doing right now with the remote learning. We're doing the best we can, but I think this is a disadvantage for students. They're not going to be learning as much, and I don't want them to be coming back this coming fall with larger classroom sizes, with less offerings, less programming. I think now is definitely not the time to be cutting teachers and staff that relate specifically to helping the teachers with the students. I think this is just not the right time for that, and going to a 2% budget, that's what that would mean. It would mean larger class sizes and less offering and less support for the students, and this is not the time to do that.
I just wanted to add one thing. I don't know if Elizabeth's also trying to get in. Elizabeth, you look like you're frozen to me, so I can't tell if you can get in. But to respond directly to the suggestion that we just cut salary and benefits to avoid then cutting positions, that's not something that we can do as an administration or as management. That's what collective bargaining is. We have to agree those things at the table. And at this stage of negotiations with all three unions, we're not in a position to disclose what either side has proposed. And we have to work that kind of thing out at the bargaining table. We're pretty far away from agreements with any of those three unions, and we have to do our very best to make sure that there is room in the budget for whatever the outcome of those is. We don't just get to decide that and tell people that their salary and benefits are going to be cut. All of that has to be agreed with those bargaining units. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I would just add there are other terms within existing contracts that would include, for instance, displacement, right? So, for instance, if there was a position we wanted to cut that was currently occupied by an individual at a master's plus 30, and that individual has the correct licensure to call a different position within the unit, the current salary schedule and salary grid at the extreme would require that 2 FTEs at the most junior level on the salary schedule be RIFed in order to offset a more senior individual who exercise displacement rights under the current contract. So Bridget's comment about the collective bargaining process is accurate there, and the notion in this field and this this contractual environment of really just freezing salaries or just cutting X amount of positions is very fluid around the contract, with other terms that provide employment rights and so forth. So it's not as straightforward as I think some people may believe it is. I'll stop there.
Okay, Margot Rogers has a couple of other questions that were follow-ups to her previous question. One is, I found the answer related to no double dipping for healthcare for administrators to be confusing. It still sounds and looks to me like double dipping. I think a detailed example would be useful here.
Yeah, I'm not sure what part of double dipping is confusing, but I guess if I were to give a specific example, because total comp includes the total healthcare benefit, if an administrator is accessing a family plan right now, they would be paying about ballpark figures would be about $25,000 of their total compensation toward the premium, and about up to $5,000 for out of pocket, so a total expense of $30,000. And if the statewide award went into place, the district would be absorbing approximately 85% of that total expense on behalf. So there would be that offset, but it is not in the current budget, because that does have to be bargained, and the Senate bill that I mentioned, 226, is still in flux. So that is, like I said, there's no offset in the district budget in benefits that would offset what administrators are currently absorbing.
And again, those salary and benefits increases that are in the FY21 budget right now are simply placeholders for what gets agreed at the bargaining table, really. So that's kind of where we are on those. Margot's other question was related to professional development. In the teacher's contract, it appears there is a limit of $84,500 per year maximum. So I'm curious why there is a significantly higher amount in the budget for this.
I'm not exactly sure where she, and Amity, I'll call on you in a second here, but professional development was previously mentioned. In the teacher's contract, there is mentioned there's a fund available for both workshop and conferences for professional development, and that is on a first come, first serve. Obviously, it has to have bearing on the work that you're doing that supports student learning. And so those are dollars, we divide those dollars up into first semester, first part of the year, second part of the year. There's a process that's run out of the Director of Learning's office around how those go. And so that's the way that is orchestrated. I don't know, Amity, do you have anything else to add specific to the PD, or Mike Martin, maybe you have something as well, I don't know.
I can just speak to the fact that it's not just the teacher contract dollars that are in.
Good point. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so there's professional development for support staff as well, and there's professional development for administrators as well. So there are three contracts. And Amity, is there a professional development in there for non-union support staff at all, or any other staff? Because I mean, for example, some of the positions that we're talking to on the phone tonight are not part of the administrators bargaining unit, but I know you guys do professional development to keep up with changes that the state is passing down and that kind of thing too.
Yes, it does. It includes all staff support, non-union, union, administration, and teachers. And I can just speak to a specific group, meaning our IT group, their professional development, their conferences are not, they happen often, but there are years where they need to attend something and they're not, so some years you might see a budgeted number higher because they'll be in a cycle that they need to try and some of these trainings. So that's the reason. It's not just teachers.
Thank you, Amity.
Thanks, Amity. Joe Patrici had a quick comment. I think we followed up on it. It said this would not cut teachers or programs, just less money for salary. But I think we talked about that previously in our previous answer. So I'll move on. Heather O'Clair says the board might not want to see cuts, but the public needs them. I feel like we need to do more cuts. I feel this is a great time to show kids that during tough times, we need to tighten our belts and how to do that graciously. I don't know that there's a specific answer to that. So I'll thank Heather for her feedback in that regard. And I'll move on to Dan Emmons. He has a question, or he says, it is very concerning that in the event of a 100% mail-in vote, there is no real way to substantiate the legitimacy of the votes. There's a serious situation for vote fraud. For example, I have 3 voters in my home, and if I wanted, I could either submit all the votes in my favor for them or significantly influence the other 2 votes. This does not seem to be a legitimate way to hold any vote in any matter. Opinions on these thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not the town clerk, but I know that it does happen, and I think what the example would be illegal, right? I mean, that would be an illegal act, and I don't believe that we have community members that would act in an illegal way. I'm not able to comment specifically on how that would happen, but it would be mailed to the individual who has residence in South Burlington, and it would be for them only. And so I think, this is again between the city clerk, and again, we have been in close contact with Jim Condos, who is the Secretary of State, who is a longtime South Burlington resident, by the way, and obviously our legal counsel to figure out how best to do it during these particular difficult times. So again, we understand, but at the same time, I would say if that's the best way to do it and avoid social distancing and practice what we need to do, whether it's in May, late May or early June, then we're gonna take advice from our legal counsel and the Secretary of State.
I want to chime in and just say that I respectfully disagree with the assessment that mail voting is filled with fraud. I've seen this going on, this debate on a national level, and I think it's more partisan politics. Thank you.
Moving along, unless any other board members have any thoughts. Next question, Andrew Ham asks, are you behind schedule with the 3 unions or on target based on expected historical timetable?
Do you want me to take that, Bridget?
That would be great. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Sure. We're getting a little bit behind the normal schedule. Generally still on a timeline. I think the one of the contractual obligations of the existing contract that in the event parties specific on the Educators Association cannot come to an agreement before a certain time frame, that we will have agreed on a fact finder and have issued or have an issued fact finding report by the end of June. So I do know at least one state collective bargaining unit has actually done fact finding through virtual means. So I think some of it is just being flexible with the current methods of meeting.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Sure.
Next question, Aaron Begnosh. Apologize if I butcher anyone's names, especially last names. The COVID-19 crisis has decimated financial markets and households across this country, including in Vermont and South Burlington. Many of us have been laid off, are facing layoffs or major cuts to our income and household budgets. It may take years before any of us recover. What has the district done to take this fast-moving, world-altering crisis into account in recent days? I'd like specific examples to be sure the community truly feels we are all in this together and the burden is shared. The community's ability to actually pay for any increases seems out of reach when personal incomes are being drastically slashed.
Yeah, can I speak to that a little bit, Bridget? Because
Sure.
This is obviously, the challenge we're faced with in this moment. And one of the things that I've given a lot of thought to is our obligation is still to provide public education for our 2,500 students that attend our schools. And that hasn't changed. And we're doing that right now in terms of from a response standpoint. So I would say that's part of the being in this together. I also look at, you know, fundamentally the impact of COVID is kind of rolling and certainly has the potential to be much longer term than anyone might have originally anticipated. So consequently, I think the challenge is going to be how do we collectively, and this isn't just a South Burlington issue, this will be a Vermont and a national issue, is how do we in the longer term kind of planfully you know, redefine the way we provide that education in a way that our country can afford. So I think those two things may go hand in hand, but our ability to fundamentally change the cost of the education we're obligated to provide right now, and that many students throughout the 50 or 60 years that South Burlington District has existed, it will require some additional thought, and all communities will be going through this conversation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Joe Patrici asks, what will happen if the budget doesn't pass? If the voters vote this down, collective bargaining will have to be resolved within that ceiling. Better a 2% ceiling than level funding. So I would just say, as a board, we've thought through that pretty carefully, and that's been sort of a background to all of these discussions as we've talked through the various potential cuts to the original proposal that the administration has provided. I think that was the background to, you know, the discussions at the administrative level about prioritizing different needs. So we understand what the potential is for a budget that doesn't pass. To be clear, the city charter says that if a budget doesn't pass, we are not obligated to level funding. It means that we have to work we have to operate as if we have level funding until there is an approved budget. So there is still the option to go back out again if we feel that that would be beneficial. So that's kind of where we are. We have to weigh those potential pros and cons and make the best assessment that we can about the budget that we believe is appropriate for next year. Anybody else have anything to add to that before I move on to the next question? Okay. Dan Emmons says administrator salaries are 2 to 3 times the median income of Vermonters, which is currently $57,513. If administrators, assuming we're only talking about principals and assistant principals, were to sacrifice their 4.14% increases, the district would see a $56,000 savings. Would they willing to forego this increase for the ability to save programming for the students? Again, I think this is a question that has to be discussed at the bargaining table. So this isn't really something that we can, I think that we can speak to tonight.
Yeah, I'd also add on that, Bridget, the comparison to median income across the state is, you know, we benchmark the positions within the district to the largely within the county we serve in Chittenden County, which many salaries are at a premium to the rest of the state from a median standpoint. So from a benchmarking standpoint, and again from a total compensation standpoint, based on the experience levels of many of our administrators, we're well within the guidelines of those benchmarks. Yeah.
You also have to understand that administrators have a pretty high level of education and experience within our district. And so one would expect that their salaries would be above the median of the state as a whole.
And I would, lastly, just want to indicate that, you know, our administrators, I mean, I think most Vermonters are benchmarked on a 40-hour work week, probably safe to say, and that is not the case of administrators on a normal year. You know, administrators are out far beyond 40 hours, sometimes often approaching 60, 70 hours. And I'll tell you that during this particular time, we've got a lot of people, a lot of administrators are spending an exorbitant amount of time. So I think that also has to be benchmarked against some of the other individuals. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Christina Wallach asks, why do we approve the budget prior to the conclusion of bargaining negotiations? Elizabeth, would you be willing to take that one? Or do you want me to?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's really tied to the annual operating budget that operates on a July 1 fiscal year, and the fact that bargaining typically starts around the October timeframe prior to the end of an agreement, and the terms of those agreements can run. In the past, I've seen them run anywhere from 1 year up to about 4 years. So oftentimes those terms are out of cycle with an annual operating budget. But that notwithstanding, our goal as a board is really to have a settled contract prior to the start of a school year. So that would allow a little bit more predictability in terms of annual budgeting.
Yeah, and in past years, I know that several cycles ago, we did manage to have multi-year contracts, and that also gave us a little more visibility into the future about what we could expect for budget increases or at least for salaries and benefits. And the struggle has been really that over the last few years, we've gotten guidance from the state level to do 1 year contracts. I guess we had a 2 year contract in there, but then do 1 year contracts so that we could account for the fact that the state was going to sort of take over the healthcare piece in terms of negotiations.
Yeah.
And so it's been a little tricky to put into place multi-year contracts that would give us a little bit better visibility in terms of budgeting. So yeah, that's been an additional challenge to the cycle issue. Christy Stern asked, if the state education fund can't give any monies to this budget, how much would my taxes be? If you can't answer it, can you tell me how I can calculate the amount? Thank you.
I don't know how you'd go about doing that, Bridget. I think, that's a bigger state level related matter, because we would not be alone in that draw from the ed fund calculation. So
well, if I can comment as well. I mean, the ed fund is going to have to give us the money for this budget. I mean, that has to be done. Now, the question is, how is the legislature going to fill the hole from the reduction in consumption taxes? And that remains to be seen. And we don't know how much that would transfer to the property tax. I do know that the legislature, through the Ways and Means Committee and the Finance Committee and the Senate, they try to stick as close as possible to what the yield was that was determined by the Agency of Education. I can't make any promises that that's what they're going to be able to do this year, but they really try, and that means that precisely impacts the property tax. When I talk about the yield, that's really how much per student education fund payout is going to actually be coming from the property tax. I do know that they try to do that. This year is a little bit different from the consumption tax decrease. But again, it remains to be seen how that hole is filled. So it's really hard at this point to be able to say what the impact of what's going on with COVID-19 is going to be on the education fund. So
thanks for that, Martin. Andy Samara asks, board members and David, thank you for your continued work. As a follow-up to the DEI position question, I wanted to offer my concern for the loss of that position in this proposed budget. We need someone in our district dedicated to this work. As someone who has been a leader in DEI efforts at the high school, I can say that the workload is significant and issues come up frequently. Having a person dedicated to vision planning and PD related to DEI in the district allows teachers and admin to focus on day-to-day issues. DEI is essential to our district meeting our ends. Is there an opportunity to reconsider the loss of this position?
So I'll take that, Bridget. As I said earlier, it is an important position, but I'm being asked to make some reductions in places that I think we can endure. I think Andy is a great example of someone that we've worked hard as an individual to have professional development with them. It may be that we need to put some resources back in. It may be that we need to bring in some outside people on occasion to support that. It may be that down the road, we find we're falling behind, as I said earlier, through our continuous improvement work, that we need to put some additional resources in. It may be a combined position in the future years. But at the present time, we're trying to preserve programming and classroom teachers. And I'm proud of the folks currently in the district, like Andy, who've worked hard and are not afraid to come to administration or other fellow teachers and help speak up about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm proud of, the teachers that we've got trained and our support staff to do that. And I'm not complacent in any way. So I agree with Andy that we got to keep on point. But I'm going to look to senior level leadership and administrators to help me through this. And I'm confident that we'll do well, and we're going to keep looking at it. So thanks.
Thank you. John Stern says, why has the cost per equalized student increasing by $1,283.86 per student?
Well, it's part of the ed formula. I don't know specifically. I think could look at how the formula works to come up with the net spending per equalized pupil. So
David,
I don't know where he's pointing that particular number, but yes, go ahead, Amity.
our cost per equalized pupil is scheduled to go $693.01. You'll see that on the budget worksheet right here.
Yeah, so I don't
know where that figure came from either.
Yeah, so it's going up. It's going up. Yeah, 693 at 4.35.
And a large portion of that is coming from the payment of the FY19 deficit that has to be added to the ed fund.
Yeah, thanks, Amity.
I don't know if this helps in answering, but he does clarify 3 questions down what he means.
Okay. Let me just go down. If they take the year-on-year increase from the actual to the proposed. Yeah, I would still say that Amity pointed out that it's 693. The other thing that factors into that is something that Amity said earlier, which is the fact that we are expecting at least 70 more students this year than we have this year. And we only essentially, if you get credit, if you will, for 39 of those, because it's a 2-year rolling average as opposed to a single year. And so our expenses are going up because we need to be prepared to educate those students. And that's part of the reason for increases in FTEs at the elementary school level, as well as for certain sections at the high school level to prepare for this big freshman class that's coming into the high school. But in the formula for ed spending, in terms of equalized pupils, we don't, if you will, get credit for all of those. So our tax burden doesn't quite catch up. It's bigger than it would normally be if we got credit for all of those students in a single year. So I don't know if anyone else has anything to add on that before I move on. Shir Sai asks, I apologize if you answered this last week, but I may have missed the response. Will there be any cost savings from this current canceled school year to carry over to next year? Transportation, substitutes, utilities. How does this work? Thank you.
Right now, as I said earlier, our staff are continuing to work. We've got them deployed and working, in some cases harder than ever, with longer hours than what we have throughout the normal school year, particularly when you talk about transportation. Those things are happening. There is likely going to be maybe some reimbursements to come. I don't know when that will happen, through some stimulus money that's happened to help and/or help support that. We're also providing childcare. There's probably some subsidy that will come. We understand, through the Child Care Subsidy Act, but I don't know. It's too early to tell. There are certain things that, yes, we aren't hiring as many subs, but I don't know yet what the offsets are. So we'll have to continue to, monitor some of those things. Again, we're at the tail end of a heating season, so it's likely we won't see much savings in heat, but we may see some things in cooling and things like that, and electricity. But again, we're going to watch kind of our run rate, if you will, as we continue throughout the year, and we'll be advising the board on what that looks like. We're kind of in an uncharted territory at the moment, and we are watching what we spend, but you know, I don't know what's next, you know. So yeah.
The other thing I wanted to just clarify, I think Amity said it earlier, but I wanted to just clarify that any savings that would be recognized this year, if there are any, would actually go into
Yes.
a fund that would offset the FY22 budget, because we won't know those savings in detail before a budget would need to be in place for the FY21 school year. So the state formula has us use that as a starting, one of the local revenues, they call it, or one of the other revenues in the budget before we get to how much we're drawing from the ed fund in FY22. So those savings would not be really part of this specific budget discussion so much. Chris Hebert says, I applaud the efforts of the board as well as the administration to present a budget that appropriately recognizes the needs of the taxpayers in this difficult time, but also minimizes the effect that these cuts will have on the education of our students next year. I worry that many students will be returning in the fall with significant trauma due to the disruption in their daily routines. Does the board feel the number of support and guidance staff is appropriate for the coming school year?
You know, it's actually directed to the board, but I think, you know, Mr. Hebert's on point with a lot of the preservation of our staff and services. Again, we're doing our very best with students, and I say we, but the teachers, administrators, and staff are doing the transportation, food service, are doing the very best they can to support students, but we know that this is not the way we educate our youth. You know, it's important for them to interact and connect with each other and teachers and develop those relationships strongly. And so we know that there's going to be some increased need for support and helping them to get back on track. So I do think that the staff that we have currently in this budget is important to meeting their needs. And obviously, if there's additional needs as we move through the year, we're going to have to figure out how we move some people around to help those areas. But I'm confident that right now this budget does allow us to do that.
Since the question was directed at the board, I want to say that I share Chris's concerns, and it worries me greatly. Thank you.
Thank you. Don Angwood asks, many are not aware of the new healthcare laws going into effect. Could you please explain how statewide healthcare is going to work?
I can take that one, Bridget.
Okay.
It's not so much a new law as it is that healthcare benefits are negotiated now for education employees at a statewide level versus at a local level. So the terms of that statewide award will be administered still at the local level, and plans as available through the Vermont Education Healthcare or Health Initiative will still be made available to member organizations, which include school districts and supervisory unions. So from an employee standpoint, it's relatively transparent. And from an employer standpoint, there are some gaps in the award that was made, but there's work being done to kind of identify how to fill those gaps in. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it's pretty complex. I think that you summarized it well.
Yeah, it's not. I guess to summarize, it's not a new healthcare plan. It's really statewide terms for all educational employees that are administered at a local level.
Okay. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Sure.
Kara Strempak says, trying to clarify what the percentage difference from the budget proposed to on 3/3/2020 versus the proposed budget is now. Can you restate? I appreciate the budget cuts you have made. Any further cuts will hurt optimum learning next fall after the students have faced uphill battles during COVID-19. I continue to hope you put the students' needs first instead of the minority of people who push you to make further drastic cuts against our students' futures. So part of that's a comment, but the question was, what's the difference really from the budget that was proposed on March 3rd? So at town meeting, essentially, what is the the percentage and the dollar amount difference from what people voted on last time versus where we are as of this moment.
Yeah, so Bridget, I think maybe just the expenditure difference was, back then it was 7.96 on the percent increase expenditure, and now that's at 3.80.
Yeah.
11.22% on the tax rate increase then, and now it's at 5.91. Is, I think, the significant differences in the percentages. And then the reductions were listed. And again, I would remember to point people back to our district webpage, right at the very front page, just to the right of the COVID-19 update. On the page is a link right to this particular presentation. And then I think it would be important for people to go to the reduction sheet, which is page, I want to say 12, page 12, where they can see the reductions that we talked about. And we tried to keep those as far away from students. But again, as said earlier, they've all been important, but that's where we are with the recommendation.
Thanks, David. Tyler Hart says, it seems to me that it is a waste of time for taxpayers to even vote on the budget, considering we have no control over state mandates, union bargaining, state reimbursements, etc. Who sticks up for the taxpayer?
I do.
I would say that the board as a whole works very hard to represent the taxpayer, especially at the bargaining table, especially as we work with the administration on developing budgets and push back on and ask a lot of questions and do a lot of work to try to understand how we're funding education in South Burlington. I don't know if any other board members have anything to add. If not, we'll move on to Joe Patrici. With all due respect to all of you, acknowledgement of hardworking professionals and advocates for childhood development, you are missing the unique context we are in. There is a pandemic. There is uncertainty like never before. This is likely to emerge across the next school year. You have gone from an almost 8 to an almost 4% increase. Please do some serious reframing. This is still too high. It's really more of a comment than a question. I don't know if anyone wants to pick it up or whether we should move on to the next question. I think we've pushed administration pretty hard to try to do their very best without impacting the students' experience next year, or at least impacting it as little as possible. I, for one, think it would be a mistake at this time, not knowing how this pandemic is going to play out, to make drastic cuts or policy changes that would significantly impact education for years to come in the district. I think we need to think very carefully before we make those kinds of drastic cuts that would change the way education looks in South Burlington, based on a few weeks of what has been happening. And as Elizabeth said earlier in the meeting, I believe, there may need to be a discussion about that as a state and as a nation as we move forward and as we kind of assess where we are in funding public education as a whole. But I think it would be a disservice to the students of South Burlington to make significant cuts in reaction to where we are just over the past few weeks. John Stern says, I don't expect a further answer to this, but by the numbers you show, 55,865,686 for FY21 proposed and 51,746,533 FY20 actual, and then 2,579.74 FY21 state level factor and 2,540.12 FY20 factor. The increase per equalized student comes to 1283.61 just FYI. So he said he didn't expect a further answer on that. I think we should move forward to the last question I have on the Q&A, the written Q&A, and then we'll get to any hands that are raised. Sharon P says, I'm worried about the removal of the alumni and development position. As an alumnus, I have been reached out to regarding many things such as events and opportunities to donate to the school. If this is to be cut, how will the responsibilities continue?
Yeah, I echo the same. The position has been instrumental and those connections have been important. We are not going to cut those connections off. We're going to have to figure out how we stay connected with our alumni, and we'll work hard to do that. Again, through the high school and the district office, we're going to have to figure out how we invite them and share with them and connect with them, and that's certainly a challenge. But again, as I said earlier, we made some reductions from where we were initially to get to where we are, and some of those are tough decisions, and we are going to have to take on those responsibilities.
Thanks, David. That is all that we have for written questions at the moment. I see that Annie Loop has her hand raised to make a comment or a question. Again, I would just remind everyone who's going to ask questions verbally to try to keep your questions or comments to 2 minutes or less, please. And Steve, have you unmuted Annie?
Yeah, and who would be next, Bridget? Can you see who's next?
There is no one else with their hand
Okay.
raised at the moment.
Perfect.
So
Thank you.
hand raised, but if someone else raises their hand, we'll get them
Got
in.
it. Yeah, sorry, I'm not looking at that.
Yeah, that's okay.
Good evening. I had just a few questions about computers, and then I had a small statement to make as well, if you, after the questions, if that's okay with you. First of all, I want to say I'm glad to hear that you will be transitioning over to the Chromebooks instead of what you have been using for some time now. One of my questions is, how much would be shaved off of your $561,000 budget request relating to computers if you were to do so? I didn't see item B, or maybe it's item A or B that relates to computers, and I didn't actually see how much you were willing to shave.
Amadee, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it was about $75,000 or so for next year. And my understanding was there was more potentially year on year out into the future. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, please.
75.
75,000. Yep.
74,696 to be exact. And that is a shift from the laptops to the Chromebooks. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering then, that doesn't seem like very much out of a $561,000 budget request. Given that since fiscal year 19, you are actually requesting 54,000 more in your present proposal. So if you're reducing down by $74,000, but increasing $54,000 more, how is that really a savings?
Well, part of that, Annie, we've added some additional computers because as learning has gone on over the years, we've added some more technology into the lower grades with Chromebooks. For certain grades, we go down to grade level 2 for students. So we've added some. So this isn't about getting better or bigger machines. It's about additional machines needed. Most of those in the past, they have not gone home, although currently in this particular state, we are through authorization with parents and guardians to allow them to get home for connectivity. But again, that $76,000 is an opportunity for us to change that course a little bit with Chromebooks, and we'll continue that on an ongoing basis. So you'll see those trickle into the system.
I'm not really happy with that number since you're going down to Chromebooks. Doesn't it seem like there should be more of a savings? Because you're going from laptops down to Chromebooks. I mean, remember, isn't that a significant savings?
Well, Annie, remember we have those devices currently with us, and they're leased, so they have a leased agreement. So when we push one out, the ones that we're bringing in are new ones. So to get out of our lease would be more expensive. So as we continue to age up or ones go out, then we'll bring in the Chromebook. So we'll see some savings on a year-over-year basis on that particular process, given the life cycle of those Chromebooks or the laptops.
So you said that grade 2 begins the computer usage one-on-one?
So there's Chromebooks that go down to grade 2. And again, that's part of Chromebooks. Typically, they sit in a rack and they get only deployed when teachers want them deployed. Currently, some of those computers are going out to help students during this particular period of time. Mm-hmm.
How many computers altogether does the school district have that are included in your budget line item?
Bridget, I'd be happy to sit down with Annie on a one-on-one basis and go over technology, or have her sit with Mike Martin. Maybe that might be easier to do. I think it sounds like she has a lot of good questions around technology. I'd be happy to meet with her.
I think that would be good. I think those are some tough questions to answer in a board meeting in that level of detail. So it might be helpful, Annie, if you could send an email with those detailed questions, and then perhaps schedule a call with David and or Mike Martin, as David recommends, to go over those questions in more detail. I'm just checking to see. I don't see anyone else with their hand raised.
Excuse me, Bridget. I think Annie also wanted to make a comment as well,
okay.
And she's been muted. So
okay, Steve, could you unmute Annie again? Okay, Annie, you're unmuted from our end. Did you want to say one last thing?
Thank you, Martin. Yes, as all participants on this forum can see from the list that Amity went through earlier this evening, the community has presented you with several realistic, sensible, financially responsible suggestions that, if implemented, would have gone a long way to reduce near level, your budget proposal to near level funding. You simply need to continue to shave off more line by line items and get to a level funded budget if you want this budget to actually pass by the taxpayers. A tax rate increase of 5.91% is still way too high as far as I'm concerned. 6% increase in taxes for the taxpayers in this city is way too high for many of us to be able to absorb. I'm sorry to have to say that. I wish it were not the case. Remember, these are unprecedented times that demand extraordinary measures. It's up to you as leaders to do what's right tonight. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just double checking to see if there's anyone else that was waiting to get in. I see no one else with their hand raised. So I guess, is there any more discussion that the board would like to have in light of what we've heard in terms of questions and comments from the community?
Yeah, just a quick question to clarify amongst the board. We're planning to vote on this budget to present tonight. Is that right? Are we still doing that?
Yeah, Elizabeth wanted to say something. Yes.
Yeah, I do want to just offer this up to my colleagues for consideration. And I'm looking at we don't have a definitive response yet on seeking counsel on the Secretary of State's guidelines on the voting date itself. We expect that pretty soon. We also know that there's a recent ed funding report that's been issued, the Perot and Wexler report that may get finalized in terms of a brief out of the finance group, and also the potential opportunity for at least one virtual meeting with any or all of our collective bargaining units. I guess the fundamental question that I've been thinking about is really, does knowing more materially inform the budget recommendation that we're considering tonight? And that's weighed in the balance of, does not having a budget disadvantage the district? I just want to make sure that I share that thought with the rest of the board and kind of get comments or some discussion back on that.
I'm not sure I understood when you say not having a budget. You mean not having a budget right now? Not having a budget come the new fiscal year?
Not approving a budget tonight specifically, disadvantage the district. And I'm not necessarily saying, you know, how long might that delay? That's really offset by just knowing more materially inform the budget recommendations that have been made tonight. Because it does seem like with some of the state information, we're getting a lot more information, but it also doesn't offset our need to provide an education to the 2,500 students we're currently doing that for, as well as, you know, hopefully we'll be seeing them in the classrooms come the fall.
So Elizabeth, would you be proposing waiting until next Monday to solidify a budget, or did you have in mind a time frame in which you
will? Well, at a minimum, just solidifying a budget and voting on the ballot warning at least give us the opportunity to, at a minimum, get feedback from our council on the date, for instance, of putting that ballot item forward. And again, I mean, I have to be honest, I'm struggling with this myself because I don't necessarily think in a week we're going to have information that would, and I'll use the word materially, inform the budget recommendation we're seeing tonight. And conversely, I think David has shared, and we are aware that there are some disadvantages to not putting a budget forward in that early May timeframe. So I really just wanted to share the thoughts with my colleagues here and just get some feedback to help my own thinking.
I mean, I guess for myself, this is Brian, if we were asked or forced to delay a vote for some time, I don't think that would inform the kind of work that we've been doing tonight, going through line by line and looking at what to keep and what to take out. No, I don't think that would change that at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like administration has worked pretty hard to give us a solid budget to take forward. That being said, I mean, we're not in a position tonight to actually warn the ballot language. We simply don't have it and wouldn't be ready to do that until next week anyway. So I'm quite ambivalent because I feel like we've really had the discussion and we've really worked through the recommendations and we've really kicked the tires. So I have to say I'm kind of ambivalent. I also don't know after any other board questions or feedback. There are a couple more questions that have come in specifically around this issue. So I don't know if we want to open that up. But does any other board member want to weigh in on whether we should vote tonight to take action on this or whether we should hold off?
I mean, I'm ambivalent as well. I mean, it doesn't hurt. It's not going to matter, I don't think, that much if we voted out today, since we have a little bit more time. I'm not sure how much will change between now and next Monday, unless, of course, we hear back that we're not going to have a vote until later in May. Maybe buying a little bit more time might make more sense.
Can I chime in on that, Martin? You know, with the recommendation that elections for April and May be canceled, I guess my concern is that the limiting factor we have is South Burlington's ability to have an all absentee ballot election. And I know there's some infrastructure and a lot of gearing up for that would have to happen. So I was hoping that maybe we could get some feedback from the city clerk's office on that, because that's the way I'm sort of visioning it happening. And I know that's a couple steps ahead, but I think social distancing is going to go along, you know, pretty much through the summer. So that's my concern.
I mean, I guess I understand that, and that will obviously affect process and procedure, but would any changes like that affect what we're doing here tonight, right? Would that change this?
Yeah, I guess to me it's a question of whether there would be any progress on collective bargaining in the interim. And a week doesn't seem like a lot of time to actually make progress, because I feel like we've heard a lot from the administration, and they've gone not only through their own process, but really looked through a lot of the community feedback as well, and considered it and decided what they could take into account and what they couldn't. The real outstanding piece is the collective bargaining agreements, and I just question whether in a week we would make a lot of progress on that. And so the question is whether to leave it open for that week or not, in my mind.
I guess my point is that if we decide, with further consultation with our legal counsel, with Donna Kenville and the like, that we're not going to have this vote until June, then we may have a little more time to try to get something done in collective bargaining. That's, I guess, more the issue for me.
Well, and my understanding is, first off, any surplus to this budget, whether it came in the form of savings based on the way we're currently operating, or a budget that's approved that there are expenses we don't realize for whatever reason or another, that would roll forward into the 2022 budget anyway. So I really just wanted to make sure we're having this conversation as a collective body. The flip side is that we do have that hard date of RIF notices in that May timeframe. I believe, David, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we'd have to see. I mean, if we're not allowed to have the vote in early May, or if it's just not possible to do it safely, I would assume we would go back and ask for further extension on when we would have to do the RIF notices.
Yeah, we currently, again, the leadership of the teachers have been extremely flexible and worked with me. We moved it twice now, and now we're currently at May 2nd for informing the leadership of the reduction in force, in May 15th for delivering the RIF notices. So in the event that the budget doesn't pass, if that happens, then we would have to go out with RIF notices May 15th. And I think what Martin's asking is whether or not that would they go, further than that. And again, I think at that point, I don't know, but I know that you're getting close. And so teachers, obviously, if they're open positions in other places, that's going to start to, make certain teachers, I'm sure, that are uncertain about their future, go to those other locations. And so that creates some major, turnover, professional development void, relationships and connections, those things start to happen. So that's what we always try to avoid, because again, our staff, teachers are critical and know our kids and have great relationships with them, and that work.
To that end, David, most districts around the state, most supervisory unions do have approved operating budgets for this coming year.
That's correct. There's only a couple in Essex Westford is late. They vote their budget later. There's only a couple that have budgets that did not pass.
Do we know what Essex is doing under the current guidelines? Because I saw that they warned their budget pretty recently for a vote. I can't remember the date, but it was within that time frame we're talking about.
Yeah, they're looking at the same advisement as we are. So we're partnering with some advice on what to do again as well.
So will we know by next Monday if we're going to be able to proceed with the vote on the first week of May?
I mean, that's the hope right now. I mean, the hope is that we'll get some more specific guidance from the Secretary of State and our legal counsel, and be able to understand. I think, as all of you know, that we could be, May could be better than June, as far as social distancing. It could be worse. I don't know. But one of the things for sure is that we do want to get, we know that we're going to need to move forward. We know that hopefully we're going to get out of this sooner rather than later. We know that we're going to have a new school year upon us, and we know we're going to have the needs that we have. And it would be nice to try to preserve and get contracts to teachers as soon as we possibly could. So all that kind of factored in. When is the best time, given kind of the current prognosis? I'm at this point, I'm thinking again that the May date, or maybe a little bit later into May, maybe the best. But part of this is contingent upon the city, the state, and the city working with us to ensure a fair and equitable process for voting. You know.
Yeah, for me, I'm not in a particular hurry. I would ask, what do we gain by a delay? You know, is national economic information going to inform the choices that we make on a spreadsheet like tonight, or is state level guidance, or is local community feedback? You know, are we going to hear something different? I would ask what we gain.
And maybe conversely, Brian, what harm is it to combine it with the ballot warning next week?
Yeah, true.
I mean, since we have to, I mean, I'd be thinking a little bit differently if we didn't have to come back anyway.
If we weren't coming back for that, you mean?
Right.
Yeah, if we didn't already have a meeting warned, it would be a different issue, because we'd be adding yet another meeting that community members maybe felt like they needed to attend to weigh in and all that. But it's already a warned meeting that we knew we would need to come back for anyway.
And I think we can keep this fairly limited. I think we've definitely given the community lots of opportunity to weigh in. I don't think we need to have a 3-hour meeting to get further input, since I think we've heard all the viewpoints at this point. So it can be a relatively straightforward meeting. If we find out, yeah, we're going to go the first week of May, we can finalize our discussion of this budget and vote on it.
Yeah, so we haven't warned that meeting yet. Just to be clear, we are proposing and have discussed with you earlier about the 13th, Monday the 13th, and the idea of that meeting would be primarily, obviously, the warning. Again, if you add the budget, that certainly could happen, and then we had the hiring of the Rick Marcotte school principal to that particular meeting agenda as well. So those would be either the 2 or the 3. And I don't know what time you'd want to start on that. We're thinking about moving it up, but I think if you're going to have that back on there, we would probably start it again at 6 o'clock.
That makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fair enough. I've got no objection.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to include all of that then.
Okay.
There are just 4 community questions or comments. Would you like me to run through those quickly, just written ones? One is just a comment. It says, "My thanks and gratitude to our school board, superintendent, and administrators for clearly explaining some details for us citizens and educators. I am both. I hope that we will pass this budget on our next vote for the goodness of our schools and benefit for our children. My children are SB grads, and they have made great opportunities for themselves as college students and in the workforce because of our great schools. Our budget provides great opportunities for our kids. Love my town, love my schools. Thanks for all you are doing tonight, Dave Grippo." And then John Stern has 3 comments. I'll kind of combine them into one. It says, "I support what Elizabeth is suggesting, that we have time to understand what is soon coming and so delay until we all understand better. Don't make the same mistake as was made with the capital bond vote, all or nothing. Let's make a better decision with more information." And then one was just a correction to what he had written, but I think I got it as I read the question or the comment. And then John Stern also says, "Brian Minier, if state incomes are dramatically altered, if unemployment tips one way or another, if COVID-19 curve changes, yes, then with more information, you would be able to make better decisions. Choose to consider that or not. I can tell you with 100% certainty that our efforts and our vote will take those ideas into consideration. Not sure what you don't get about this idea." And that is it for written questions. I'm just checking on participants to see No one, at least that I'm seeing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, I don't see anyone with their hand raised at the moment. So it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, board, that we are then saying that we would not take action tonight on the budget, but we would delay that until next Monday, the 13th at 6 p.m. Is that correct? Okay. Martin, you're on mute, but I see you saying yes. And then that would move us then to the next agenda item, which again, I think is off of the agenda. Actually, consider the special meeting warning for FY 2021. Again, that is moved until next Monday at 6 p.m. So are there any other board questions or comments before I ask for a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, just a quick one.
Yeah.
Could we ask the city clerk to chime in on the possibility of having an all-mailed ballot vote?
I'm working on that, Alex.
Okay.
And I'll be working on it. I tried to connect with her today, and I'll continue to do so tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, David.
Anyone else?
I'll move to adjourn.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. We should have gone roll call, but I think we're all in favor of it.
Yeah, everyone said aye or raised a hand. So thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Aye.